Manipulation doesn't begin when someone speaks. It begins the moment they identify what you react to. That's the part most people miss. Manipulators aren't powerful because they're smarter than you. They're powerful because they watch you lose your center. They study where you get flustered, what makes you defensive, what triggers you, what makes you want validation, and what you rush to explain. They don't need to overpower you. They only need to redirect your attention. What breaks their influence is not confrontation, anger, or loudly calling them out. It's calm, disciplined awareness. It's understanding the psychology behind their behavior before you engage with it. And that is the part most people never learn. In high-stakes protection work, emotional reactions are liabilities. They cost time, clarity, and safety. You cannot chase every distraction, every provocation, every attempt to hijack your focus. You must operate from a place of internal stability, because stability is what keeps you sharp. Manipulators thrive on confusion. They thrive on making you doubt yourself. They thrive on the emotional fog that clouds your judgment. But when you approach them with the same composure used in interrogation rooms and protective intelligence work, everything shifts. You stop being the person they can easily pull off balance. You become the one quietly assessing, watching, calculating. You become the one in control. The truth is, manipulation is not an attack on your intelligence. It's an attack on your perception. When someone wants to manipulate you, they're not trying to outthink you. They're trying to influence what you notice and what you ignore. They want you to focus on their words while missing their intentions. They want you to react to their tone while overlooking their tactics. The moment you understand this, the dynamic changes. You stop taking things personally. You start seeing patterns. You start understanding motives. And that understanding allows you to disengage from their game entirely. Imagine standing in front of someone who is trying to provoke you. Their goal is simple: get you to react. Because reaction creates openings. Reaction reveals insecurities. Reaction gives them information. But when you remain calm, when you keep your breathing steady, your face neutral, your voice even, you give them nothing. You offer no emotional leverage. Without leverage, they cannot manipulate. They can only talk. And talking alone doesn't control you. This is the same principle the Secret Service uses when assessing threats. You don't let someone dictate the pace. You don't let them decide where your focus goes. You observe, you analyze, and you respond deliberately, not impulsively, not emotionally, but with intention. Manipulators lose power when they cannot predict you, when they cannot provoke you, when they cannot redirect your attention. They become exposed because their tactics rely on your compliance, not your awareness. The more calmly you see people, the more clearly you see their strategies. And once you see their strategies, you cannot be controlled by them. Your awareness is your shield. Your composure is your strength. Your ability to stay centered is what breaks the entire manipulative structure from the inside out. A true protector is not defined by size, strength, or loudness. They are defined by their ability to remain centered when everyone else is losing their footing. Calm is not passive. Calm is not weakness. Calm is control. And in the world of protection work, where split-second decisions determine outcomes, calm is the foundation of every strategic move. This same principle applies when dealing with manipulators. They rely on creating chaos, tension, urgency, and emotional pressure. They want to destabilize your internal state so they can slip their influence past your awareness. The moment you become unsettled, you stop thinking clearly, and that is precisely where they gain ground. But when you cultivate the protector's mindset, the dynamic reverses. Their chaos never penetrates your composure. The protector's mindset begins with awareness. Not paranoia, not suspicion, awareness. You understand that people's actions are motivated by needs, insecurities, fears, and desires that often have little to do with you. When someone behaves manipulatively, they're not expressing power. They're expressing a deficiency. They lack either the emotional intelligence or the integrity to communicate directly, so they resort to indirect tactics. A protector recognizes this and refuses to personalize it. Instead of reacting, you observe. Instead of absorbing their emotional volatility, you hold your ground. You choose clarity over chaos. This mindset allows you to see manipulation for what it truly is, a strategy used by someone who feels they must compensate for something they cannot directly address. Calm is also the key to tactical patience. Manipulators push for quick reactions because quick reactions benefit them. They want you flustered. They want you cornered. They want you making decisions without thinking them through. High-pressure tactics only work on someone who believes they must respond immediately. But a protector knows they always have time, even if the other person insists they don't. That psychological distance is powerful. It allows you to collect information, observe inconsistencies, detect motives, and respond only when you choose to. This is how you turn the tables. The moment you stop rushing, their strategy starts losing effectiveness. In the Secret Service, calm is trained until it becomes instinct. You're taught to manage your physiology, your breath, your posture, your tone, because your body reveals your mind. Manipulators watch your subtle cues. If they see you tense, they know you're rattled. If they notice your voice shift, they know they've triggered something. But if you remain steady, they have nothing to latch onto. The protector's mindset teaches you to regulate yourself so thoroughly that another person's emotional volatility cannot override your internal baseline. That self-regulation is what keeps you in control of the interaction. Most importantly, calm gives you access to truth. Chaos blurs it. Fear distorts it. Pressure buries it. But calm makes everything visible. When you stay steady, you can see the difference between what someone is saying and what they are actually doing. You notice their hesitation, their inconsistencies, their attempts to redirect. Your perception sharpens. You gain insight they didn't intend to reveal. When you operate from that level of awareness, manipulation loses its grip, because the person in control is never the loudest. It's the one who can see clearly, think clearly, and move deliberately, regardless of the chaos around them. In protective intelligence work, the most important information is rarely spoken aloud. It exists in the fractures between words, in the unconscious, split-second movements that reveal a person's intentions long before they fully act on them. These are micro-behaviors, small shifts in body language, tone, posture, or facial expressions that slip out before someone has time to control or hide them. Manipulators, no matter how practiced, are not immune to these instincts. In fact, the more someone tries to influence or deceive you, the more their micro-behaviors tend to leak. Reading these cues doesn't require aggression or confrontation. It requires observation without emotional interference. That's how you begin to see people clearly. Micro-behaviors start with baseline. Every person has a natural rhythm: how they talk, how they hold themselves, how they move when they are comfortable. When someone is being truthful, their behavior aligns with this baseline. When they attempt to manipulate or deceive, subtle deviations appear. For example, a normally calm speaker may suddenly start over-explaining. Someone who usually maintains direct eye contact may begin glancing away during key moments. A person who is typically confident may fidget, shift their weight, or exhibit micro-expressions of discomfort. It's not the gesture itself that matters. It's the change from their normal pattern. In protection work, this is how threat assessments begin, not by guessing motives, but by noticing shifts. The power of micro-behavior analysis lies in its subtlety. You're not interrogating. You're not accusing. You're observing quietly, giving the other person room to reveal themselves. Manipulators depend on verbal persuasion, emotional pressure, or narrative control, but their bodies often betray the truth. A slight tightening of the jaw can signal frustration when they pretend to be calm. A quick inhalation can indicate they're preparing to lie. A pause before answering can expose calculation rather than honesty. These cues don't tell you the full story, but they tell you exactly where to look. Reading micro-behaviors also requires discipline. If you approach every interaction with suspicion, your mind becomes cluttered, and you start seeing danger where there is none. The goal is not to judge people, but to understand them clearly, without the fog of assumption or emotion. This clarity allows you to see when someone is trying to manipulate you by inflating urgency, guilt, or confusion. When their words present one story but their body reveals another, you gain insight into what they truly intend. A key element of reading microbehaviors is recognizing self-soothing actions. When someone feels anxious, guilty, or pressured, they often touch their face, rub their hands together, adjust their clothing, or perform small, repetitive movements. These behaviors signal internal discomfort even when their words sound confident or rehearsed. Manipulators often attempt to appear composed, but these subtle slips reveal the effort behind the mask. When you see these micro-behaviors, you don't react. You simply take note. You let the information guide your next move. In the field, the people who survive dangerous situations are not the strongest. They are the most observant. They notice what others overlook. They trust the information presented by behavior rather than the stories people try to sell them. When you learn to read micro-behaviors, you gain that same advantage. You stop taking things at face value. You begin seeing the difference between intention and presentation. And once you can see that difference, manipulation loses its power, because people can no longer hide their real motives behind polished words. Emotional neutrality is not indifference. It is far more subtle, far more powerful. It is the ability to maintain a steady internal state while fully observing the external world. When someone attempts to manipulate you, their goal is always the same: to provoke a reaction. They want to see your anxiety, your anger, your defensiveness, your uncertainty. These reactions are like levers. The moment you move, they gain influence. Emotional neutrality, in this sense, is a form of control. It allows you to be fully present in a conversation or interaction without giving away your internal state. This skill is one of the cornerstones of protective intelligence and interrogation psychology, where maintaining composure is not just a strategy, it is survival. The first step in cultivating emotional neutrality is awareness of your triggers. Manipulators often know what buttons to push, and they push them deliberately. They may criticize, question your competence, appeal to guilt, or attempt to provoke fear. But every reaction you feel has a source, and every source can be understood. By identifying the situations, phrases, or attitudes that typically evoke a strong emotional response, you can begin to detach from the automatic impulse to react. Detachment does not mean passivity. It means choosing the moment of response consciously, rather than letting the provocation dictate your behavior. Next is physiological regulation. Emotions are not just mental, they manifest physically. Heart rate increases, muscles tense, and your breathing may become shallow. Manipulators exploit these physical cues, often unconsciously, because they are reliable indicators of internal vulnerability. In high-level protective work, training emphasizes controlling the body as a way of controlling the mind. Calm breathing, relaxed posture, and measured speech act as signals both to yourself and to others that you remain unshaken. By regulating your physiology, you create a feedback loop. The calmer your body, the calmer your mind, and the calmer your mind, the less material you provide for someone else to manipulate. Emotional neutrality also requires mastery of attention. Manipulators attempt to hijack your focus, often through urgent demands, dramatic statements, or attempts to provoke guilt or fear. The mind naturally wants to engage with these stimuli, but if you allow your attention to follow every provocation, you give away control. The disciplined approach is to observe without attachment, to notice without immediately responding, and to evaluate without judgment. When you can separate the content of someone's manipulation from your internal reaction to it, you gain clarity. You begin to see patterns instead of responding to isolated incidents. You begin to see intent instead of being distracted by delivery. Another critical aspect is practicing mental rehearsal. Professionals in protection and intelligence work often mentally simulate challenging interactions long before they occur. They anticipate provocations, prepare responses, and plan how to maintain composure under stress. This preparation builds confidence, which in turn reinforces emotional neutrality. When a manipulator encounters someone who has anticipated their moves and remains calm, the manipulator is disarmed. Their power depends on unpredictability and emotional exploitation. Emotional neutrality removes both. Emotional neutrality is reinforced by perspective. Manipulation often preys on perceived urgency, scarcity, or threat. By maintaining a broader perspective, you recognize that most provocations are attempts to gain leverage, not reflections of objective danger or truth. You can see the person for what they are, someone attempting to influence your behavior for their own gain. From this position, you are no longer reacting to the manipulation itself. You are observing, analyzing, and choosing your response on your own terms. When you combine awareness, physiological regulation, controlled attention, mental rehearsal, and perspective, you create an unshakable center. You become the observer of behavior rather than its victim. Manipulators lose their advantage because their tactics rely on eliciting emotional responses. Without reaction, their influence diminishes. Emotional neutrality is the invisible shield that allows you to act deliberately, respond strategically, and maintain power without aggression. In this state, you are no longer pulled into someone else's game. You define the terms of engagement. Reaction control is the single most powerful tool you can develop when facing someone who attempts to manipulate you. Manipulators rely on predictable responses. They count on your impulses, your instinctive need to defend yourself, justify your actions, or prove your value. Every reaction you give them is data. Every visible emotional response is a lever they can pull again and again. Reaction control, in contrast, deprives them of that leverage. It is the discipline of observing without immediately responding, of processing before acting, and of maintaining authority over your own mind, regardless of the pressure applied. This is the skill manipulators fear because it turns the entire dynamic upside down. Suddenly, their strategies lose traction, and their control evaporates. Mastering reaction control begins with recognition of the triggers. A manipulator's tactics are rarely random. They are highly calculated. They might provoke with subtle criticism, with selective omission, or with appeals to guilt or fear. They exploit your insecurities, knowing exactly where a reaction is likely. The first step is to internalize that the stimulus, the comment, the accusation, the pressure, is not an attack on your identity, but an attempt to manipulate your behavior. Separating stimulus from self is crucial. The moment you see their tactic for what it is, you gain a fraction of space between impulse and action. That space is the margin of control. Physiological awareness is an essential component of reaction control. Manipulators feed off changes in your body language, tone, or energy. Heart rate spikes, clenched fists, rapid breathing, and elevated pitch are all visible signals of vulnerability. The discipline lies in consciously regulating these signals before the mind's emotional circuits fully engage. Calm, measured breathing, relaxed shoulders, and a neutral voice are not simply displays of composure. They are functional tools that create mental clarity. In this way, your body reinforces your mind's control rather than betraying it. Another critical aspect of reaction control is timing. Immediate responses often serve the manipulator more than they serve you. When someone provokes, your instinct might be to defend or explain. Instead, the most powerful response is often deliberate silence. Waiting allows you to process the situation fully, to assess whether a response is necessary, and to decide the form it should take. Silence, in fact, can be a strategic weapon. It deprives manipulators of the feedback they crave, forces them to reveal more, and shifts the power dynamic subtly but decisively. It signals that you are not reactive, that you are not impulsive, and that your decisions are deliberate. Mental rehearsal strengthens reaction control over time. Professionals in high-risk protective environments repeatedly simulate scenarios in which they are provoked, pressured, or threatened. By practicing disciplined responses ahead of time, you train your mind to delay reaction, recognize manipulation cues, and respond with precision. Over time, reaction control becomes instinctive. The manipulator no longer finds predictable openings because you have built a mental pattern of deliberate observation, measured response, and unshakable presence. Reaction control is rooted in perspective. Every manipulative tactic is ultimately a reflection of the manipulator's own intentions, fears, or needs. By focusing on this external truth rather than your immediate emotional interpretation, you maintain clarity. You recognize that their goal is influence, not necessarily truth, and that giving in to their designed emotional trigger only enhances their power. The combination of awareness, physiological regulation, timing, mental rehearsal, and perspective creates a state of unassailable control. In this state, you are no longer a participant in their game. You set the terms, choose the pace, and dictate the response. Manipulators fear this not because it is aggressive, but because it is unyielding. It is a mastery of self, which is ultimately the only form of power that cannot be coerced or stolen. Strategic silence is one of the most underestimated tools in dealing with manipulators. Silence is not emptiness. It is a deliberate, controlled pause that communicates far more than words ever could. When someone attempts to manipulate you, they rely on filling the space with pressure, confusion, or guilt. Their tactics often involve creating urgency, asking leading questions, or provoking emotional responses that force you into immediate action. Silence disrupts this rhythm. It removes the immediate reward they expect from your reaction and allows you to regain control of the interaction. In high-level protection work, silence is treated as a tactical asset, a weapon of observation and influence. It is both shield and signal, and when used intentionally, it is profoundly disarming. The first element of strategic silence is observation. By remaining quiet, you create space to notice patterns and inconsistencies that are often invisible in the noise of conversation. Microbehaviors, subtle tonal shifts, and unconscious gestures become more apparent. A manipulator's effort to guide or provoke you often becomes visible precisely because your response is withheld. Strategic silence allows you to see their intent clearly without clouding the picture with reactive emotion or defensive explanation. In this space, you are the observer, not the participant, and clarity becomes your greatest advantage. Silence also communicates strength. Many people confuse talkativeness with confidence, but in reality, the ability to hold your own without filling space with words signals composure and authority. Manipulators instinctively push against resistance, testing boundaries and seeking openings. When their attempts to provoke are met with calm, measured silence, they encounter friction that is difficult to navigate. The absence of reaction deprives them of information, slows their momentum, and subtly shifts the power dynamic. It is a quiet assertion that you are in control of your mind and your actions, and that nothing external can force you off balance. Timing is critical in the application of strategic silence. It is not a passive refusal to engage. It is an active, tactical pause designed to serve your objectives. This pause allows you to process what is being said, consider your options, and determine whether engagement is necessary at all. Often, the manipulator will reveal more than intended as they attempt to fill the silence themselves. Their words may become hurried, inconsistent, or revealing. In this way, silence functions as both mirror and magnifier, reflecting their tactics back to you while amplifying your insight. It is a tool that transforms the interaction from reactive to intentional. Maintaining silence also requires internal discipline. In the moment, the mind naturally wants to defend, explain, or justify. Manipulators rely on this instinct. They create situations that provoke a response, counting on your desire to close gaps, clarify intentions, or appease their aggression. Mastery of strategic silence involves resisting this compulsion, remaining calm, and trusting the pause. The more practiced you become, the more automatic it feels, and the more it communicates composure without a single word. Over time, silence becomes an invisible shield, a boundary that protects your emotional and cognitive integrity. Strategic silence cultivates perspective. By refraining from immediate verbal engagement, you allow yourself to see the interaction in its broader context. You notice motives, patterns, and inconsistencies. You understand not just what is being said, but why it is being said. This insight is critical for identifying manipulation before it escalates. Silence is not avoidance. It is the conscious creation of space to act decisively rather than impulsively. It ensures that when you do speak, your words are deliberate, intentional, and unassailable. In a world dominated by noise, strategic silence is clarity made visible. and manipulators instinctively recognize its power. Manipulators thrive on pressure. They create urgency, tension, or discomfort, often in subtle ways, to force decisions before you have fully assessed the situation. Pressure tactics are designed to make you feel rushed, guilty, or anxious, emotions that short-circuit rational thinking. Understanding and identifying these tactics before they gain traction is essential. In high-level protective and intelligence work, recognizing pressure is not just an advantage, it is a necessity. The moment you see it, you regain the ability to respond on your own terms rather than being pushed into someone else's agenda. The first step in spotting pressure tactics is awareness of patterns. Manipulators rarely operate randomly. Their approach is calculated, aimed at exploiting human tendencies toward compliance, avoidance of conflict, or the need for approval. You may notice repeated attempts to rush your decisions, repeated appeals to authority, or subtle emotional cues intended to provoke guilt. Sometimes it is overt, deadlines, ultimatums, or aggressive questioning. Other times it is subtle, a sigh, a raised eyebrow, or a pointed pause meant to unsettle you. Every manipulation tactic leaves a footprint, and attention to these details allows you to identify the strategy before it has an effect. Understanding the psychology behind pressure tactics is crucial. Manipulators rely on what psychologists call the fight, flight, or appease response. By creating an artificial sense of urgency, they trigger the instinct to react quickly. This response is natural but predictable. They know that a person under pressure is more likely to comply, make concessions, or overlook inconsistencies. Recognizing this mechanism is the first step to neutralizing it. When you see the urgency as manufactured rather than real, you can step back mentally and evaluate the situation with clarity rather than with fear or impulsivity. Another key element in spotting pressure tactics is observation of baseline behavior. Every individual has a typical way of responding to normal situations. When someone is attempting to manipulate, deviations from this baseline often appear. A sudden increase in insistence, subtle threats, or attempts to provoke an emotional reaction are red flags. Similarly, the manipulator's own behavior may change when they escalate pressure. Hesitation, over-explanation, or repeated attempts to dominate the conversation can indicate that their tactic is failing or that they are seeking an opening. By observing these cues, you gain the upper hand because you are no longer responding blindly. You are seeing the pattern unfold in real time. Strategic pause is essential when pressure is applied. Manipulators thrive when your response is immediate. Hesitation often creates discomfort for them. By taking even a few moments to breathe, assess, and plan your response, you deny them the leverage they are seeking. During this pause, you can mentally categorize their tactic, determine your own boundaries, and decide whether engagement is even necessary. In many cases, pressure tactics lose their effectiveness simply because they are no longer met with compliance, defensiveness, or fear. Silence, calm observation, and deliberate pacing are your most powerful defenses. Spotting pressure tactics requires perspective and self-discipline. You must recognize that pressure is a tool, not a reflection of truth or authority. Manipulators attempt to distort perception by making you feel that their demands are urgent or unavoidable. Understanding that this is a psychological strategy rather than an objective reality allows you to remain grounded. By observing patterns, identifying deviations, understanding the underlying psychology, and pausing before reacting, you maintain control. You see the manipulation for what it is, and you respond with strategy rather than emotion. In doing so, you disarm the tactic entirely, and the manipulator's power is neutralized before it ever reaches you. Boundaries are not merely rules or limits. They are the invisible armor that protects your mind, your energy, and your autonomy. High-control individuals, whether in professional protection work or in everyday life, understand that the ability to maintain clear boundaries is what separates influence from manipulation. Manipulators are adept at probing weaknesses, testing limits, and encroaching on your mental and emotional space. Without clear boundaries, even the most disciplined awareness can be undermined. Boundaries function as both shield and framework. They define where influence ends and intrusion begins, allowing you to operate with clarity, authority, and composure. The first step in creating effective boundaries is self-knowledge. To enforce limits, you must know your own values, priorities, and tolerances. High-control individuals have an internal map of what is acceptable and what is not. They know which behaviors, demands, or pressures they will engage with and which they will not. This internal clarity is not rigid stubbornness. It is a conscious framework that guides decision-making. When you have defined this map, you can recognize when someone is attempting to cross it, and you can respond in a measured, deliberate way rather than reacting out of surprise, guilt, or fear. Boundaries are also preventative. By clearly defining what is acceptable in your interactions, you reduce the opportunities for manipulation before they arise. Manipulators often test limits gradually, using small transgressions to gauge compliance. A person without boundaries may concede repeatedly, never realizing that each concession is reinforcing the manipulator's leverage. By contrast, someone with established boundaries signals early that certain behaviors are unacceptable, reducing the manipulator's ability to escalate tactics. This preventative power is subtle yet formidable. It communicates control without aggression, authority without conflict. Equally important is the consistency of enforcement. Boundaries are not effective if they are applied inconsistently. Manipulators are highly attuned to patterns, and inconsistency signals vulnerability. High-control individuals respond consistently to attempts at encroachment, whether that means calmly refusing a demand, disengaging from a conversation, or redirecting the interaction. The key is that the response is deliberate, unemotional, and aligned with the boundary itself. Over time, manipulators recognize that attempts to cross the line will yield no advantage, and their influence diminishes. The boundary becomes a psychological deterrent, not just a rule. Boundaries also interact with presence and awareness. In protective and intelligence work, physical and psychological boundaries often overlap. Maintaining spatial awareness, observing micro-behaviors, and controlling the pace of interactions reinforce the psychological limits you establish. A person who holds their ground confidently, communicates clearly, and controls attention signals that intrusion will not be tolerated. This combination of presence and boundary enforcement makes manipulation far more difficult because it deprives the manipulator of the uncertainty and doubt they rely on to exert influence. Boundaries are a form of empowerment. They shift control from the manipulator to you without requiring aggression, confrontation, or intimidation. High-control individuals do not rely on force. They rely on clarity of self, consistency, and strategic assertion. By understanding your own limits, maintaining composure, and enforcing boundaries deliberately, you communicate that your mental and emotional space is not negotiable. Manipulators instinctively recognize this form of strength because it is unassailable. It is rooted in self-awareness, discipline, and intention. The stronger your boundaries, the less opportunity there is for manipulation, and the more you operate from a position of freedom rather than reaction. Walking away is often misunderstood as a form of surrender, retreat, or weakness. In reality, it is one of the most powerful strategies for maintaining control when dealing with manipulators. Distance, both physical and psychological, creates clarity. It removes you from the immediate pressure, from the emotional triggers, and from the manipulator's leverage. In high-level protective and intelligence work, walking away is not avoidance. It is a calculated maneuver. It signals that you operate on your own terms, that you refuse to be controlled, and that you maintain sovereignty over your decisions. It is a demonstration of power, not concession. The first step in walking away with power is recognizing when engagement is no longer strategic. Manipulators often escalate when they sense resistance or neutrality. They test your boundaries, push for reactions, and attempt to exhaust your patience. Sometimes, no amount of observation, neutrality, or boundary setting is sufficient in the moment. Continuing the interaction under these conditions gives them the leverage they seek. Walking away is a conscious choice to prioritize your composure, your judgment, and your long-term strategy over short-term engagement. It is a reminder that power is not always in confrontation, but in knowing when to disengage. Distance also functions as a psychological reset. Manipulators rely on continuous pressure to destabilize your decision-making. By creating space, leaving a conversation, stepping back physically, or pausing before responding, you interrupt the cycle of provocation. This interruption allows your mind to reassess, analyze patterns, and determine the most effective next step without emotional clouding. Walking away does not mean abandoning awareness, it means enhancing it. The manipulator is forced to operate without the immediate feedback they depend on, and that absence can quickly diminish their influence. Maintaining composure while walking away is essential. The act must be deliberate, controlled, and free from reactive emotion. Walking away in anger, frustration, or shame communicates vulnerability and may inadvertently reinforce the manipulator's tactics. The most effective disengagement is calm, neutral, and intentional. It communicates that you are not swayed by urgency, intimidation, or provocation. You are acting from strategy, not emotion. In this way, walking away becomes an assertion of authority, demonstrating that your autonomy is not negotiable. Another aspect of this strategy is timing. Walking away too soon may signal avoidance. Waiting too long may allow the manipulator to continue testing your limits. The key is discernment, knowing when continued engagement provides no value and when distance will maximize clarity and control. Professionals in high-stakes fields often rehearse this balance, internalizing the understanding that power lies not in constant engagement, but in selective engagement. Each moment you step back intentionally reinforces your command over the situation and communicates that you are not available for manipulation. Walking away also preserves energy. Manipulation is exhausting because it demands constant vigilance, reaction, and emotional management. By stepping away, you conserve mental and emotional resources for situations where engagement is productive, deliberate, and within your control. This approach aligns with a broader principle in tactical psychology. Energy, attention, and focus are finite. Protecting them from unnecessary depletion is a strategic choice, not a compromise. Walking away with power reframes distance as strength. It is the conscious use of absence to assert presence, the deliberate refusal to participate in someone else's attempt to control your behavior. It communicates boundaries, reinforces clarity, and preserves composure. For manipulators, this is disarming because it removes leverage, visibility of reaction, and control over outcome. For you, it is liberating because it transforms disengagement into an act of authority. In mastering this strategy, you learn that true power does not always reside in confrontation. It often resides in the courage and discipline to step back, to observe, and to act only when it serves your clarity and your purpose. Boundaries, when cultivated and maintained, become the psychological armor that protects not just your decisions, but your inner world. They allow you to engage deliberately, respond strategically, and maintain authority over interactions without aggression or emotional compromise. For manipulators, this clarity and consistency is disarming because it removes leverage. For you, it is liberating because it transforms awareness into actionable protection, turning every interaction into an opportunity for mastery rather than entanglement. Your awareness is your armor. It is not flashy. It does not require loud declarations or outward displays of power. It is quiet, deliberate, and deeply effective. Throughout every interaction, every conversation, every subtle test of boundaries, the individual who maintains awareness holds the ultimate advantage. Awareness is the lens through which you see not just what is said, but what is intended. It allows you to perceive the patterns, the strategies, and the motives that manipulators rely on to gain influence. When you cultivate this awareness, you create a protective layer around your decisions, your emotions, and your autonomy, one that cannot be breached by coercion, provocation, or deception. Awareness begins with observation. High-level operatives, whether in protective work, intelligence, or negotiation, are trained to notice what most people overlook. They see micro-expressions, subtle body movements, inconsistencies in speech, and shifts in energy. They note the patterns in behavior over time, the repeated attempts to test limits, and the cues that signal a manipulative intent. This is not suspicion, it is disciplined observation. It is neutral, unemotional, and strategic. By cultivating the ability to notice without immediately reacting, you gain a powerful advantage. You can process information, anticipate tactics, and respond deliberately rather than impulsively. Equally important is the integration of internal discipline. Awareness is only useful if it is coupled with emotional and cognitive control. Observing manipulation without reacting requires you to maintain composure, regulate your physiological responses, and preserve your internal calm. A person who notices everything but reacts instinctively forfeits the power that awareness provides. By contrast, someone who observes, analyzes, and then chooses a measured response turns observation into strategy. Awareness without discipline is merely perception. Awareness with discipline is invulnerability. Another critical element of awareness is contextual understanding. Manipulators attempt to create urgency, uncertainty, and pressure precisely because they want you to lose perspective. Awareness allows you to step back, to see the broader context, and to separate tactics from truth. You recognize that pressure is manufactured, that provocations are strategic, and that attempts to manipulate rely on predictable reactions. By maintaining this perspective, you retain clarity. You operate not from emotion, not from compulsion, but from reasoned understanding and strategic insight. Awareness transforms potential vulnerability into deliberate strength. Awareness also amplifies your ability to maintain boundaries and exercise judgment. Every tactic, every attempt to provoke, every test of limits can be seen, evaluated, and addressed on your own terms. Awareness tells you when engagement is necessary and when walking away is the most powerful move. It informs the use of silence, reaction control, and distance. It allows you to act decisively without aggression, to assert authority without confrontation, and to protect your autonomy without displaying volatility. In short, awareness enables you to navigate the most complex and challenging social dynamics with clarity and control. Awareness becomes a continuous practice, a way of life. It is not limited to interactions with obvious manipulators. It is applied to every exchange, every negotiation, every moment where influence and pressure might be exerted. The more consistently you cultivate it, the more instinctive it becomes. You begin to see people and situations as they truly are, not as they appear or as they want you to perceive them. This form of mental clarity is the ultimate shield, the most reliable form of protection, and the most empowering skill you can develop.